Hello, welcome to Slimehouse, a podcast of crude humor, outrageous hijinks, and some mild language. I'm Jared.
I'm Jasper.
I'm Max.
I'm Nelson.
And I'm Jake.
And today, we're continuing our dive into the spookiest slime over the decades with the Hallows' Eve classic from 1993, Disney's Hocus Pocus.
Ooh.
And today we have an esteemed guest of honor. You may know him from former podcast The Batch Boys or some starring roles in many independent films. Jake Collins. Please welcome Jake.
Hey, thanks guys. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here. I'm ready to get spooky and share some thoughts.
I should have mentioned too that he is a Halloween enthusiast.
I am, yeah. I'm a unicorn. I'm a rare breed. I'm one of those people that likes Halloween.
What is your favorite Halloween costume you've ever done then, Jake?
I was E.T. from the movie E.T. when he dressed up for Halloween. So if you recall, he wore a bedsheet and clown shoes, and that was his costume. And so that's what I did.
That's amazing. I love
That's
that.
good.
It's very meta.
Real quick, what's everyone else's favorite Halloween costume? Nelson, you're up.
I've had a couple good ones in my day. I was a crazy cat lady in 7th grade, and I had like wiry hair that was like really nasty, and then like a bathrobe with cats in all the pockets. And the real sticker was I had toy cats on elastic string so I could throw them at people and they would bounce back.
Wow. Very cool.
In 2010, I was 18 and I was at Chapman at this point, so it might be a little too past the point you should be trick-or-treating or whatever, but I basically made a short film about Where's Waldo, and I got a costume of the red striped shirt, the hat, all that stuff, and then like I wear glasses, so I had all the ingredients ready to just go as Waldo, so I did, and I think it turned out pretty well. So I'm gonna say my Waldo costume.
Mine would probably be just based on, I don't really know why I went as this costume, but when I was like 12 or 13, I went as Joaquin Phoenix in his like David Letterman appearance for Halloween. And that's gotta be, and it's either that or I went as Sully from the movie Sully last year. So it's gotta be one of those two.
My old boss's 10-year-old daughter went as Sully, fully unironic. She loved the movie.
Oh wow, yeah! Can't believe we have there's two people who've gone as Sully.
That's very funny. Max, just real quick, does the line "birds" ring a bell from Sully?
Of course, yeah, of course. I've seen Sully way too many times.
Oh man,
That's very funny.
Jasper, what's your costume of choice?
I actually have two that come to mind. One, when I was very young, I was really into NASCAR. So I was Jeff Gordon, the NASCAR driver. My mom made like a legitimate from scratch Jeff Gordon racing suit, but then my dad constructed a cardboard car that went around my waist, and I just walked around with like a cool cardboard Jeff Gordon car. But then in 2004, I was in 7th grade at the time. This was right after Napoleon Dynamite had come out in the summertime, and it had not gained its like cult success yet. It was like still relatively unknown, but I went as Pedro with the Vote for Pedro, or sorry, I was Napoleon with the Vote for Pedro shirt. And so we were trick-or-treating, me and my friends, and then we got to one house, and it was a bunch of high schoolers, and they were like, "Oh my God, guys, let's get pictures with this kid." And they were just like stoked to like see like a Napoleon Dynamite thing. And then subsequently, 2 years later, when I went to high school, turns out those were all the film club kids at my high school.
Very cool.
So it was a nice like tie-in there.
Mm-hmm.
But on another Halloween classic note, let's get to some Hocus Pocus.
A perfect place to start might be, I love his Halloween costume. The lead character in this movie gets a funny Halloween moment because the older brother does not want to participate in Halloween whatsoever. And so he's dressed in street clothes, just ordinary stuff. And they come downstairs and the dad says, "What are you supposed to be for Halloween?" And unenthusiastically he says, "I'm a rapper." And the dad says, "Well, you better turn your hat sideways then."
Oh man, yeah, there's some cringy white rapper references in this movie.
Back in 1693, the people of Salem, Massachusetts, witches,
Yes?
thought they got rid of the Sanderson sisters for good.
We shall be back!
300 years later, it's Halloween Eve, and they're back.
We're home!
Are you broads a little old to be trick-or-treating?
We're talking about 3 ancient hags versus the 20th century. How bad can it be?
Now they're digging up old friends
God, what a stench!
and running amok,
Come on.
looking for the one thing they miss most.
You stay for supper. I'm not hungry. But we are.
If you're not familiar with this movie, Hocus Pocus, the plot is on this fateful Halloween night, a group of kids, they all live in Salem, Massachusetts, and they accidentally awaken a trio of witches, and mischief ensues. The movie was directed by Kenny Ortega, who went on to be at the helm of the High School Musical series for Disney. I think the name Kenny Ortega is just very Slimehousey in a kind of abstract way. It's kind of fun to say. It's got a pretty stacked cast. Bette Midler as one of the sisters, the main sister, Winnie. The Sanderson sisters are the witches. I think one of the earlier roles for Sarah Jessica Parker of Sex and the City fame as Sarah. Then the last sister is Kathy Najimy. The kids in the movie, the lead of Max is played by Omri Katz. Vanessa Shaw plays his love interest Allison, and then his little sister is played by Thora Birch. A few other noteworthy performers in this. Jason Marsden plays the voice of Kat that helps the kids out in their conflict with the witches, and then Doug Jones, movie monster royalty and collaborator with Guillermo del Toro, he plays Billy Butcherson. So yeah, let's get into this. This 93 is sort of like it's the thick of the ooze era of Slimehouse, as we like to say. This movie is unique because it has sort of a foot in the 80s Goonies style of proto slime that we kind of talked about previously in Monster Squad, but it also kind of has traditional slapstick humor in it. And it also has, because it's a Disney movie, it has more of a family-friendly sheen than Goonies or Monster Squad does. One thing I wanted to say too, I think most of us watched this movie on Disney Plus, but I actually rented it from a local video store out here in Seattle. It's kind of like the Vidiots of Seattle. It's called Scarecrow. And if they have a movie, they usually only have like 1 or 2 copies of it. But I asked them about Hocus Pocus, and they were like, oh, we have like 6 copies of that for Halloween. So
That's a bunch of Hocus Pocus.
it's a lot of Hocus Pocus. I don't think this movie was that big when it came out, but it definitely has had a following over the years, and I think it's a big hit with my generation.
Our generation.
Yeah, our generation, of course, the millennials. One thing we learned about this is that they're planning a sequel after all these years.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of a movie that gained a lot of following after the fact. I read also that it was a summer release, which is pretty wild considering it's a very Halloween movie. But that was because they didn't want it to compete with The Nightmare Before Christmas, came out same year. So I think in that sense, and I saw this on video. I can actually remember seeing it pretty vividly at like a day camp at my mom's fitness center, like where the parents send their kids, when the parents want to work out, they send their kids to like this like afternoon.
Yeah, those are the worst. I always hated those.
So, and I remember them saying like, we're going to watch Hocus Pocus. And I was like, what's that? And they're like, oh, you've never seen Hocus Pocus?
What, were you born the year it was released?
The year before, but yes.
I actually thought this movie was a Disney Channel original for a long time, just because I saw it on TV so often. And I mean, it's definitely like I thought it was on the higher end of them, just based on like it looks pretty high budget for one of those. But yeah, like I didn't realize this was a theatrical release for the longest time until the whole Hocus Pocus revival happened, and maybe around 2015 or 2016 is when I feel like I started seeing Hocus Pocus stuff everywhere.
I mean, I remember just watching it on Disney Channel too, and I kind of just lumped it in with that era of the Disney Channel version movies like Under Wraps or Halloween Town or Don't Look Under the Bed.
Yeah, I feel like I always kind of conflated this with Halloween Town in my head. Was a big reason that like I thought of it as a Disney Channel movie and not like a theatrical movie.
And I know this wasn't like super successful at the time, but I feel like it became a blueprint for so many subsequent movies that Disney put out, like Under Wraps, like Halloween Town, and now even, it's, to me it feels very similar to Goosebumps or House with a Clock in Its Walls. This spooky but still very fun, light Halloween movie. This is just so much more wide-reaching in its audience, whereas Monster Squad's kind of teenage boy. This is moms, dads, little sisters can enjoy this as well.
I actually quite enjoyed rewatching this. I only remembered bits of it, like the vacuum cleaner. That was sort of images like that populated my memory, but not specific plot or anything. And I really liked it because it's a truly PG movie. I think we've talked a lot about ratings and how, in a lot of ways, with animated movies becoming PG instead of G, there suddenly was a space for PG live action movies, and Slimehouse movies live in this time when PG movies had a real foothold. And there's a lot of dark humor. There's a lot of sexual humor with Sarah Jessica Parker in particular. And that is all kosher, and it's all within this PG world that's really fun for all ages because that stuff whizzes over the kids' heads. And most Slimehouse isn't that sexual in nature or whatever, but it also has some really good scares. I actually jumped a little bit when they pull up the bed and she's hiding in the bed. Like, that was a good scare, and and also a scare that's okay for kids. I feel like nowadays children's movies are so sanitized and so afraid of inducing nightmares or whatever that it's a really fine line to make scary stuff for kids. But I think this movie threads the needle really well, and that's probably why it did really well as sort of a cult Disney Channel VHS.
That's actually something that really stood out to me. It's like, this movie's it's not terrifying or anything, but something that stood out to me on this rewatch. It's a pretty scary movie as far as the concept that these witches are killing children to take their youth. That's a scary concept, especially because the witches, in my head, I thought of them as purely comedic characters. That's how I remembered them. But their actual goal, they're very evil.
Yeah, this is my first time watching this movie, and
oh wow,
yeah, same as Monster Squad.
A virgin.
See a lot of those jokes in this, and they were in Monster Squad, and they're in this too. And I think I haven't seen a lot of Halloween-themed slime movies. I didn't grow up with them because my family was not really into horror movies that much. The exception to the rule was Ernest Scared Stupid because my dad loves the Ernest movies. But I didn't watch Monster Squad or Hocus Pocus or probably these other movies from the 90s that we'll talk about. But there's the opening to this movie where they basically sacrifice a younger kid, and they basically take her youth and they become more like younger versions of themselves, these witches. It reminds me of this DVD commercial around 2000, 2001 for Snow White, a re-release of it, the Platinum Collection version. It was from the evil queen's perspective, and it had this really ominous red yellowish font.
There was an apple.
A magic wishing apple. A wishing apple? Yeah. One bite, and all your dreams come true.
The one that started it all.
Make a wish.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Coming to video and Disney DVD fall 2001.
Oh, vaguely remember that.
I kind of remember that. I feel like I had a lot of those Disney DVDs, so I saw all of those.
It was on the dinosaur DVD.
I definitely had that, so yeah, that sounds familiar.
Wait, so what about it? What's the connection?
It's a very Disney-fied attempt at being ominous and scary, and rewatching those commercials now, they're very polished in a way that doesn't make them scary to me now, but they were scary to me back then. So to tie it back to this movie, I just kind of put me back in that mindset a bit, watching this kind of Disney version of scary stuff. And it's effective. I agree with you guys. It's very Burton-y.
The original Snow White and a lot of those early Disney movies are pretty scary. Snow White in particular has a lot of gothic horror, real horror elements to it, and that's kind of what Hocus Pocus reminded me of. A lot of it felt like a throwback to the classic Disney, which were very dark and sort of gothic in their imagery.
Sure.
There's something also about this movie, Jared, you say bringing that trailer was from the Queen's perspective. To me, this is one of the first movies I can remember where the villains were almost the favorite of everyone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about this movie, they're the funny ones. They're the ones you quote. The kids are just kind of there to be the good guys. As a kid, I remember this being one of the
Mhm.
very first movies that introduced that idea of like, oh, bad guys can be funny, these witches can be funny, evil can be funny at the same time as being evil.
My expectation going into this was going to be like a movie from the villain's perspective, and like they're actually sympathetic and they're good, kind of like Megamind or Wreck-It Ralph.
I
But
was gonna
like,
say Megamind,
Or-
yeah.
yeah, so like that was where I thought they were going with this movie. I was very glad that that's not where they went with it, and it was like, oh no, they're bad to the bone.
Yeah.
They'll put a spell on you.
Hello, sailor! My name's Wilfred! What's yours? I put a spell on you, and now you're gone! My twenty fell on you, and it was strong.
Jake, what's been your experience with Hocus Pocus over the years?
Oh, so yeah, Hocus Pocus is one of those movies where it's like when it comes on, you watch it. You know, like I've seen Hocus Pocus. It's probably in the top tier of like rewatched movies because I watch it at least once a year, basically. You know, it was one of those like, oh, it's on ABC Family or Disney Channel, like 13 Days of Spookmas or whatever they call it. You know, so it was a big one for me. Seeing the intro again as an adult, I had forgotten about that. I was like, oh shit, are we gonna see a little girl die right now? Because, like, I know the story. The brother gets turned to a cat. His whole thing is the remorse and grief he has for not standing up to them at the time. And then they get there and they suck the life out of her. And then they just, like, throw a blanket over her and her hair's gray. So they, like, skirt that. And I was like, okay, so, like, it still wasn't, like, Witches with Angelica Houston, which for me was a spooky witch movie.
Very scary movie.
Yeah, that's one of the scariest movies that I've seen is The Witches.
Oh, I love The Witches.
Yeah.
I was terrified when they turned the kid into a rat.
Yeah.
I remember for a week I was kind of like really paranoid of unfamiliar liquids because they pour a liquid on him, or like he has to drink a liquid or something, and then he turns into the mouse. So I remember like when I was like 8 or 9 being like, I don't know what that is. I don't want to turn into a mouse.
It's mouse juice. Yeah, so this has a very big place in my heart, and it actually held up pretty well. Yeah, very likable. There was a lot of things like watching with a critical eye that I could be like, all right, like whatever, but being that I was raised with it, and I think even, I hope, people seeing it for the first time can understand that this is a damn near perfect movie.
On that note, what do we think about its slime factor? Is this a Slimehouse movie?
What it made me think about is like, is there a subgenre of Slimehouse that's just horror mashups of family horror film mashups? It's a little slime, like I don't think it's like super slimy, but I think it's like it definitely is a one of the movies that kind of set the tone for that like sub slime, if you will.
It's interesting watching this right after Monster Squad because it feels like such a natural next step. They'd actually be a pretty good double feature because they're very similar in plot. These otherworldly beings coming into a small town. And I think Hocus Pocus is a little more effective because it's Salem and they've got some other interesting stuff. It's just a little more cohesive, I think, than opposed to monsters coming from literally the sky or whatever.
Oh, but boo-hoo.
But I think it's also a step more in the Slimehouse direction than the previous Monster Squad, and it has a few tropes and kind of slimy moments. It's not wall-to-wall slime, but I think it's enough of that to be considered within the Slimehouse umbrella.
To your point, Nelson, it did feel very apropos watching this immediately after the Monster Squad, in that it feels like a little sister or little brother to that movie. I always kind of picture this as like a slime classic, but it really doesn't thematically and plot wise. It doesn't really play as a Slimehouse movie as we've kind of started to define it. Mm-hmm. But I think it is the beginning of a lot of the Slimehouse aesthetics visually. On a technical level, there's this harsh, colorful lighting to this movie that really, to me, is very reminiscent of a lot of later Slimehouse movies. Whereas in the 80s, in a lot of the kind of proto-slime stuff we've watched, Monster Squad, Weird Science, there's no real, exaggerated lighting or color in those movies per se. But here we see it's so saturated. There's so many bright, clearly they threw like 20 gels on a light, and it starts to have that classic Slimehouse look, even though narratively it's not necessarily in the wheelhouse.
One of the great things that we've uncovered in the podcast so far, and I know this is something we probably all noticed on our own, but the plot is very well set up that the kids have to save the day.
Yeah.
And I think that can be something we really hang our hat on with Slimehouse as a defining element, that the kids are in charge, the parents in a few great scenes are totally unable to help with the situation. So the movie does a really good job of fitting in that Slimehouse trope of it's the kids who are the ones with the agency to save the day.
Definitely. And also something I thought was really interesting. I didn't realize that I forgot that this just takes place over one night. Pretty much this movie takes place nearly in real time. I mean, it starts with his day at school, and then they go trick-or-treating, and then they go to the house, and then, literally all hell breaks loose. And then the movie ends at the end of the night, which is kind of a cool plot. It was something I totally forgot about this movie.
I think one thing that stands out about spooky slime movies is the setting, especially when they're like about witches and what have you. This movie reminded me of the 2012 Leica animation movie Paranorman, because it's also set in like Massachusetts, New England, Salem area. The family in this movie basically relocated from the LA area, I think, where Monster Squad is set, or at least filmed, and is moved to this like kind of more traditional location for these kinds of witch adventures. And another thing, similarity I see in these kind of like spooky slime movies is the way they're spoofing the spooky monsters. And a lot of the humor comes from the juxtaposition of like the nature of the monsters and their background, where they come from, witches in this case. The fact that they're kind of slow to grasp the concept of Halloween in a contemporary world, where it's just like a time where people dress up and they're not actually witches. And at some point, there's a old man dressed as the devil, and they actually think he's the boss.
Played by Gary Marshall.
Yeah, uncredited cameo.
And his sister, Penny Marshall.
Yeah.
What a wild scene.
It is pretty great. In that scene, there's like, they're watching a commercial that's basically, a baby chasing a dog. And like, that is like a very Slimehouse commercial within a Slimehouse movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I kind of love that kind of like echo and like having that kind of like meta quality.
Something about that scene, when I saw this movie as a kid, that scene is what I remember specifically. That like when people would talk about Hocus Pocus, I'd be like, oh, the movie with like the baby. I thought the baby chased the dog in the movie, yeah, but like that's what I remembered, and I don't know why, but like yeah, I always like when I like thought about Hocus Pocus, I thought about like the baby chasing the dog with like the music, like the classical music playing, which like yeah, that I feel like that commercial is extremely Slimehouse. What is it the commercial for? It's a real commercial, I think.
Is it?
It's got to be for like baby food or that baby walker thing.
Yeah,
it's
it's some kind of weird baby thing, or maybe a dog food, one of the two.
I just put this together. I think the significance of having a baby commercial in that particular scene is that they're looking for children, and so she sees the baby on the screen, and she obviously doesn't know what a TV is, and like that's why she screams, because children, which I honestly just put together right now.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that.
If you want to look even deeper into it, the character watching the commercial is Mary, who from the get-go is very dog-like. She has a lot of canine-esque traits. She barks, and anytime that Winifred tells her to attack, she says "sick 'em."
Oh.
In the beginning of the movie, she said "sick 'em," and in this, it's a baby chasing a dog. Which moments later, that same breed of dog, dressed as the devil, chases them out of the house.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Bravo.
So that's just a very small thing I noticed. But it was absolutely, that's a Kenny Ortega tidbit to the T. Like if I know Ken O, that's what he does.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's his stamp.
Amazing.
Just going into Jared's point about the protagonists and who they are, there's another key Slimehouse character trope, and that's the fish out of water. The humor is very similar to Austin Powers, which isn't Slimehouse in my opinion at least.
Yeah, it's high praise.
There's some slimy bits.
There's some slimy bits.
It's like adult slime. It's
That's neither here nor there. The point is, it's like that time travel, but I don't understand the modern world, which is a great way to have a fish out of water component. And this is just one of many protagonist examples where they're just wrong place, wrong time, and there's hilarity in that's built. And they're slow to adapt a lot of things, and yet when a joke calls for them to know it, they do. For example, at the end of the movie, she's riding on the broom alongside the truck, and she says, like, "Can I see your driver's license?" or whatever.
Yeah. She says, resisting arrest?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yes,
you thought a road was a black river.
Which is actually my favorite line in this whole movie is when they get up to the pavement for the first time and they say, "Oh, it's a black river." And then they push Sarah Jessica Parker in, but she doesn't fall in the water. So I don't know which witch says it, but it just says, "'Tis firm."
It's her.
Yeah, that's good. That's real
It's
good.
the silliest, weirdest line. But
So wow, their learning curve was steep then, from like not knowing what a road is to like knowing procedure for arrest.
They were in the library at one point, and they got stuck there, so they had time to pick up some books and learn about civilization and society and how it all works.
She came out speaking French out of that kiln.
Also, going off what Nelson and Jared were saying, I think something we're seeing in Hocus Pocus here, and as we saw in Monster Squad, are this reversal of personality in a lot of these horror icons. Here, the witches are very funny. They're evil, but, you know, they're lovable. In Monster Squad, Frankenstein is not scary. He's a friend who just doesn't understand the world. Next week, we're taking a look at Casper, and that reverses the role of, like, a ghost shouldn't be scary. You know, they were a person once too. And you see this a lot in the 90s too with, like, animal movies, really humanizing animals. Here it's kind of interesting in a lot of horror slime or pumpkin spice slime. You see people humanizing these dark characters for kids.
That was a fun thing about this era, I think, as a kid, especially growing up, is being able to watch what felt like a wide array of genres that really just boiled down to family and comedy. You know, where it's like, oh, it's horror. It's like, I perceived that as like a spooky movie, you know, whereas like there's other like slime movies that are a little more like romantic, and it's like, oh, that's like a romance movie. It's like, not really. There was elements of it that might have taken the spotlight, like in this, like having a love interest that they just like almost kiss once. It's like, all right, that trope is there, but it like wasn't in the foreground, you know. So I think it's a good it's a very chameleon era for kids movies.
No, that's a great way to describe it. I mean, Max, when, you know, he first described Slimehouse, you called them grindhouse for kids.
Yeah, like exploitation movies for kids, which exploitation movies also not tied to any sort of genre. It's more of like a genre within which there are action movies and horror movies and comedies and kung fu movies and whatever. And I feel like Slimehouse is similar, like you said, that like there's every genre of Slimehouse movies. There's action movies, there's spy movies, there's romance movies, but they all kind of through the Slimehouse lens is the, like, with the Slimehouse look and the Slimehouse jokes and all that.
Yeah, they're the subgenres of slime.
Yeah.
And that's where we're in the kind of Halloween phase of that.
Yeah, and I think pumpkin slime was a good thing to term this as, because there's a lot of like those like spooky kind of Halloween Slimehouse movies that we'll be getting to a lot of them, and I think this is sort of the beginning of it all. This kind of is where, I mean, Monster Squad definitely.
One thing I noticed more in this than our previous watch that makes it feel like texture-wise Slimehouse is some of the just details and props and stuff. We see like the "Do Not Enter" sign on the kid's door, which feels very Slimehouse, and like he has a basketball poster in his room, of course, because they're trying to like. And they even just like his archetype is like a California kid, like whatever the hell that means, you know, and those kind of elements that aren't even really plot related at all, but add this sense of what the 90s really were and, you know, what happened then, what the kids were into, and help sell that.
This kid's main problem is he's like new in town, not like Monster Squad we watched and it's like they're all like losers and nerds, but this he's like kind of a slacker guy, but he's not like super lame. Like he plays the drums. His like come on in the beginning is like, if Jimi Hendrix shows up, let me know, because she's talking about like having
he's
a
California kid.
And I saw like I paused it to see what his doodle was when he's doodling in class, and he writes the Grateful Dead and draws like a marijuana leaf, actually. So
Really?
yeah.
Whoa.
So
Well, I gotta go back.
yeah. So we have this. So
Good
yeah, he's a
catch.
real like slacker California kid. He's not like a nerd, even though he's not popular. That's because he's new. It's not because he's like lame in any way.
And that's interesting because he is kind of a fish out of water too, I realize. Not just the
Yeah.
witches, but I loved the Salem location, and specifically that the classroom at the beginning, the kids are all so into it. They love the like mythos of Halloween, and I think it's so funny to like paint Salem, Massachusetts. It's like a place where like this is like your heritage, and you love the spooky story of the Sanderson sisters.
I went to Salem for the first time a couple years ago, and I was hyped. I was like, this is gonna be a good time, and it was just as like Halloweeny as I thought. Like I assumed I was like hyping the Halloween up in my mind, but like every corner there's a Halloween like gift shop. In every corner there's like a weird wax museum with some weird interpretation of the Salem witch trials. It's a very slimy house city in that regard.
Yeah, I've never been, but in sort of a meta turn, like my brother went, I think last year, and he told me that it's kind of like super Hocus Pocus focus now. Like they have a lot of Hocus Pocus tourism, so you'll go to all these spots where like actual witch history or whatever happened. They'll be like, also like this is where Billy Butcherson like rose from the grave in Hocus Pocus. And, like,
This is the manhole they climbed out of.
yeah, like all the witch museums kind of like have added like little Hocus Pocus areas and stuff. So sort of like this movie treats it like Salem as like here's the witch tourism place. Now it's the Hocus Pocus tourism place.
That's very funny.
Mm-hmm.
And I think today there was a trailer that dropped for another Salem movie called Hubie Halloween with Adam Sandler.
Oh, with Adam Sandler, that's right.
Yeah, which maybe that will maybe we'll see all kinds of Hubie Halloween tourism in the next year.
Come, little children, I'll take thee away into a land of enchantment.
Y'all want to do a little trope time? Let's get those tiny little tropes out of our pockets that we've been saving for now.
Oh, this is my favorite segment of this show.
Nelson, you've always got a good one up your sleeve.
I mean, I've mentioned a few interspersed throughout. One specifically, we talk a lot about junk food as being a key part of Slimehouse, and of course, there's a line where like the parents ask her if she like OD'd on Halloween candy, and there's some more like forward examples of candy being part of it because it's Halloween, you gotta have candy. But a more oddly specific one is that in Thora Birch's character's bed, when she's sleeping, there's a bag of Mother's cookies right next to her head. And I was so confused. I was like, why does she have a bag of sugar cookies next to her head while she sleeps?
And it wasn't even her bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So the trope is Mother's cookies.
Yeah.
Making an appearance
I'd say
I mean, just like proof.
It's product placement too.
Mm-hmm.
Product placement and junk food permeating every corner.
Yeah, I would say
possibility.
Mothers is. I can't think of any Slimehouse movies that feature mothers outside of this, but I feel like just aesthetically, the Mothers like frosted animal crackers, very Slimehouse kind of food.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Very much so, very much
yeah.
The iced oatmeal ones were a big hit in my household.
Oh yeah, we always kept around the animal crackers.
Well, we mentioned the Thora Birch character, and I was going to bring that up. Kind of like the sibling relationship in this movie. It's kind of like very typical of Slimehouse movies. They're kind of like they butt heads a bit, but they got each other's back. And there's like one shot that was very slimy to me, which is when they're about to enter a party, and they give each other this kind of like simultaneous nod of agreement that's very choreographed before they enter the party where the other main kid, Allison, is at. There's also the whole dynamic of Thora Birch embarrasses her older brother by mentioning that Max has a crush on Allison, and there's the whole line about Yabos, which is yet another kind of like raunchy slime moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say that family relationship, and also at the end, that was funny because her character, Thora Birch's character, Danny, she develops an attachment to the cat character in this that can talk, and the effects on that cat are really great, which we can get to later. But her character grows very fond of that, pet, and there's like the bond between pet and kid in these Slimehouse movies is one that is thicker than water, and There's another movie that we've seen recently that same actress has a bond with like a pet and Monkey Trouble. So just some aspects of that.
My biggest laugh out loud moment in watching this movie is a sibling moment where Max wants to hang out with his crush or whatever, and he's like, "I'll do anything you want to do this." And it's funny because I feel like part of growing up is you lose like the creativity of like, if money was a non-issue, like what would anything you want be? And she has the perfect answer. She's like, "Okay, next year we're going trick-or-treating as Wendy and Peter Pan with tights, or it's no deal."
That's very funny.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like that's so endearing and funny, and only a kid would come up with that. I wouldn't have come up with that as a deal.
You will now, though, moving forward.
Max, what about you?
For me, the thing that really stood out is the insults coming particularly from the bully characters, which very Slimehouse bullies in this. There's like a real punk rocker guy, and then a guy named Ice. It's like a, I guess he's like a white rapper kind of guy, I guess Vanilla Ice is the specific thing, but
No, he very much is like wannabe Vanilla Ice, because like he shaves the back of his head to say ice.
Yeah, he writes Ice in his head. Yeah.
And have you ever seen the movie Cool as Ice?
Oh yeah,
I forget who directed it, but it was in that movie Vanilla Ice. He shaves his head to look like bricks.
Yeah.
I felt like that was very much a reference to like
for sure,
fashion or lack thereof.
And yeah, so the bullies, are what stood out to me, and especially their insults, and some other insults in the movie were very Slimehouse. I thought there was a zit face was an insult at one point. I think actually coming from Thora Birch's character towards the bully. Maggot Museum was
that's my favorite one. When Winnie Sanderson shouts at Billy the zombie, "You maggot museum, keep me."
But yeah, because I feel like with Slimehouse, I always notice like the hyper specific insults. Like we had Band-Aid breath with Monster House, and I feel like this definitely. And of course, there were some topical insults too, where they called him a new kid on the block, and I feel like this kind of like childish rebelliousness towards like boy bands and pop music kind of started here, and that's something I feel like you kind of see in some of these movies. For an insult, they'll say, "Oh, you look like you're in NSYNC" or something like that, and like that. I feel like the at one point the bullies called the kid new kid on the block in Hollywood, and it's like they're trying to, I guess, say he's prissy or whatever by comparing him to pop artists. But yeah, I think the insults in this were very slimy for sure.
There was a scene with the brother right before he meets the bullies where he's like riding his bike through town, kind of in a very extreme fashion.
Yeah.
But then at one point it just cuts to a really low angle shot where he skids his bike into the camera and leaves fly past the lens. And for some reason it's so out of place in this movie. This is a pretty like reasonably shot movie. Like there's nothing flashy about it, but like that one like super extreme low showing off how cool he is on his bike was very slimy to me.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there was another trope that Nelson brought up last week where there's a scene where somebody's about to get hit with something or fall down a hole, and then there's like a split second and then they just go, "Uh-oh." And there was a good scene with that in this movie where Billy the zombie, a branch gets pulled back and he realizes, "Uh-oh." And then the branch slaps his head off and he walks around without a head for a good scene. But yeah, that was a very, very funny one that I love.
To address, both those things interest me, and I think the biking element, it's fair to say that I think the bike is almost like the vehicle of Slimehouse. I feel like so many movies have kids kind of tearing it up on bikes or like going around town, which I always kind of envied as a kid because I grew up in a city where you couldn't really do that. I never biked to school or anything like that. But in movies, another way they get kids kind of to get on their own is like have them biking around. And we see that in Leave It to Beaver, and we see that in other Clock Stoppers, some other Slimehouse movies.
Small Soldiers.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a potent component of Slimehouse. And then to Billy, I think the monster in this, like, he's a great Slimehouse foil because you can be much more violent with a zombie. Like, he can get his head knocked off or his fingers taken out or whatever, but he's a zombie, so there's no blood, there's no gore, but they can do a lot of comic violence to him. And so in that sense, it's a very effective way to like allow for comic violence in a PG movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that thought when they were in the kiln, when they were on fire, and the kids are all gathered around watching. It's like they're still human. They're still people that you're watching their flesh melt. Even as witches, I wouldn't think I'd stick around and watch that, especially with such reverie. But they should have. They shouldn't have gone outside.
Shouldn't open that damn book.
And that's it. I mean, that scene, I was also on a good note, too, that they use the school as a major plot location, which we see a lot in Slimehouse movies, because that's where kids spend their most time.
So, Jake, what sort of tropes of sorts?
Oh, man. Bar none. My favorite trope across any platform that I love in this movie, virgin shaming. Nothing will ever be funnier than virgin shaming 12-year-olds. When they talk to the cop and he's like, "Are you really a virgin?" And he's like, "Yeah." Like, I'm in like 8th grade.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then you've got to see Monster Squad.
Yeah, Monster Squad is full of that. Yeah.
Extensively last week.
Great.
We talked about some virgin shaming in that film.
Yeah, it's just, that's such a thing they teach kids, from an early age. It's just like, oh man, like, bad to be that thing that you should be at your age. Yeah, what I did like that they flipped on its head is that he like owns it every time. He's like, yeah, man, like, can we move on, please? Like, they're murdering kids. Yeah, another, I don't know if it qualifies fully as like a trope, but just like across the movie, especially with the production design, it was just very like to the point. I think Max had said at some point, it's not very flashy. It's just like, here we are, we're in the location. It's like we're in the school, empty hallways, no posters, no nothing. It's like, we get it. He's on the PA system in the dark. It's a school. In the classroom, it's super basic. There's some like bats and pumpkins just to like help ease us into the world. It's like, all right, great. It's a school. I've been there. When you get to the character's house, though, this was the most glaring for me. He opens the front door and his parents are there, very naturally opening boxes. We're new. We just moved here and we're opening boxes in this completely barren house. He runs upstairs to a fully decorated bedroom. He's got bed sheets, he's got posters, he's got a drum set. His parents are like sleeping on a mattress with no sheets in the dining room. Meanwhile, he's up in the loft, lighthouse.
Sweet loft too.
Yeah, which is very Slimehouse kids movie trope to me, is that the kids have the coolest bedrooms.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Just that, I wish we could spend more time in there. But yeah, the PD was very simple and to the point. We revisited the same locations many times, so that made it easy. We were in the cemetery at least 3 times. We were in the school twice. We were in the Sanderson house how many times? 1,000,000? 1,000,001?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I noticed, like the first scene in this is actually quite long for like a prelude.
Yeah.
It's like 15 or 20 minutes long, and most of it's
yeah,
all in the same location, which kind of for me like drags it out a lot. And now, now that I'm a little more perceptive to kind of movie production, I was like, man, like, did they just like run out of budget and have to cram a bunch of stuff like in this one location for this 20-minute?
And we see the same things too. We see the cauldron tipped over at least twice,
You're
maybe
right.
3
2
times.
Yeah, 2
it's
times.
like, I don't know, put some legs on that thing. Like, people are gonna knock it over. Like, also, if all they need is like a sip, why make such a big batch? That's just a me thing.
Yeah, the green cauldron slime, of course. You got to throw a quick shout out to that. Jasper, I'll defend that opening because, yeah, it does feel wicked long, pun intended. But it's because the humor and the kind of lovability of the movie it's a hangout movie with these 3 witches, and we get all this time with them specifically, and them in their peak moment when they're in full control of the situation. And you get some little humor, like the adult humor. She's at one point says like, don't get your knickers in a twist, and it's like,
ooh, risque.
yeah. So I think it's just long because, probably some budgetary things, but also just to like give the characters time to be goofy. And
it's also for kids. I
it's a
think
kids movie.
having that clearly laid out where it's like, next time you see him, he's going to be a cat. It's the same person. He's a cat. You with this kids? And the kids are like, okay, like, yeah, I got it. I think it helps having that like 20-minute scene, but I did notice that as well. I was like, God damn, like, are we still here? I don't remember Thackeray, who I remember being named Zachary. Very period appropriate name. Love the attention to detail. Another Kenny Ortega stamp. I mean, Troy Bolton, who thinks of that? That's Kenny S.
Amazing.
But yeah, it was a weird scene, and we revisited it so many times. And as a kid, I didn't mind. If anything, I liked it. I was like, wow, this is a spooky place. And I like that they put sprinklers in here and changed nothing else.
Yeah.
Still has cobwebs.
On the cat note, I just want to bring up the amazing kind of effect when the cat gets run over, which is actually very sad at first. And you press pause for spoilers now. When the cat gets run over, he becomes just like this pancake on the floor, and you see a shot of it, and then you see them all crying, and then all of a sudden he just like inflates like a balloon back to life. It's like one of the silliest special effects I've seen.
There was some subtle sounds of bones reattaching, which I actually did like.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, that's something I watched this with my girlfriend earlier actually, and she like was like not watching it. She was working on her computer like while it was on, and she was like, that's like a very like gross kind of like weird sound effect that they put in there of his bones like reforming as he inflates.
Yeah, they didn't shy away.
We desire children.
Hey, that may take me a couple of tries, but I don't think that'd be a problem. Hop on up.
Marvelous.
All right, let's move into one of the final sections of our show, and that's the slime score. And just for Jake's knowledge, we rank movies on a scale of 1 through 10, and rather than this being a measure of quality, it's a measure of their sliminess. So a 10 would be the most slimy movie you can think of, Good Burger or Son of the Mask or something like that, and a 1 being a movie that really isn't Slimehouse at all, but we just watched kind of by mistake. So
there's no mistakes. You need comparisons.
That's very true.
Amen.
Jake, well, why don't you kick us off now that you know the rules of the game?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for explaining them so clearly. I will admit I was so lost. Scoring is something I've never been able to really grasp, but now that
I'm not a musician either, but
for me, if I were to score it right now with my own personal background and bias coming into it, I would say it's probably like a 4. I don't think it's fully slimy. I think it's got parts of it that are slimy, but compared to other things that I have seen, I would say it's lower on the ranking for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually agree with that. I know Monster Squad last week we had a little bit of controversy and quite the division in our scores, but I would rank this on a similar scale to Monster Squad, if maybe a little bit lower, just because I feel like there's not necessarily like a mean spirit to it that Monster Squad had, whereas this is just kind of so delightful. There's no attitude in the tone, which I feel like is very important in Slimehouse. So I'm still gonna give it a 5 like I did Monster Squad, but if we were to get to the nitty gritty, I think it's a little bit lower.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of you. I think this is like a little wholesome to be like fully Slimehouse. Like, not that there isn't a little bit of raunchy humor in it. I mean, it's raunchier than an average Disney movie is. It's not as comedic as a lot of what I consider Slimehouse. Like, there are jokes, but it's much more focused on kind of the storytelling. There are jokes, of course, there's laughs in it, but it's more of a story-focused movie. And just aesthetically, there was some of, like you were saying, the exaggerated, like, cartoon lighting and stuff, but it kind of just looked like a lot of the, like, early Stephen King adaptations is kind of what it reminded me of. Kind of looked like Cujo or the Salem's Lot miniseries or something. It just kind of looked like a non-super gory horror movie from the time. So I'd say it's probably around a 4 or a 5. definitely a kids horror movie, which is kind of a subgenre upon its own that's very adjacent to Slimehouse, but not quite. So I'd say, yeah, this is 4 or 5 around that. I'd probably go with a 4, actually.
To me, this is kind of a hard movie to rate. When we do slime scores, this is being put on the same scale as like Flubber or something that's like not like a spooky slime movie. I think of this as maybe being more emblematic of Halloween slime, as of like that how pumpkin slimy is this movie. That's a different rating than like how slimy is this compared to like all Slimehouse movies.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting too is, like this is our 6th episode, and as we dive in more and we're allowed to redefine what a 5 in Slimehouse may be or what a 7 may be, I think that there's a beauty in, like us, maybe 2 episodes later, oh, actually, you know what, I might give Monster Squad a 6 now because I realize, like it is slimier than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the thing about this as well, if I could just add one more point, is I think that it's been adopted into a different classification.
Yeah.
And what for me, that's holiday movie, is that it's become more of a seasonal thing rather than many of the other Slimehouse greats, which are just like, they are Slimehouse. It's what they are. I watch it because that's what I want to watch, and I avoid it because that's not what I want to watch. Whereas this, for me, is very like tied into a time. Like, yeah, so I would say that it has been more sucked into that genre for me, and that's why part of why I rate it so low on the slime scale, is because it just has a different heart to it now.
Yeah, I just think that I don't know if like we should really be rating this on the same scale we rate House Arrest. But if we were to just do that right now, how like broadly slimy is Hocus Pocus? This movie is more wholesome than Slime in some ways, but it's also darker than Slime in others.
Yeah, it's true.
I think Max was tapping into this. This movie's humor, it's definitely not as zany or wacky as Slimehouse generally gets. I do think of it as a template for holiday slime or pumpkin slime in particular, but how well does it represent Slimehouse in general? That's a different question. I would give it around like a 5.
Those are all really sound points, and I will go with a 5 as well, because I think it has a lot of story components that are very Slimehouse, like the character archetypes we talked about, and again, the kid agency thing, which I really think is something we've caught on to that's very keen to this. But it's not built around hijinks. It's not built around some of the kind of chaotic Slimehouse moments that we know for it. And when you're talking about quintessential Slimehouse, you wouldn't put Hocus Pocus. If someone asked you what Slimehouse, you wouldn't put Hocus Pocus on your top roster, because that wouldn't be a proper representation of what we consider Slimehouse.
Going off of what you're saying, Nelson, about the humor, we're realizing that most humor in Slimehouse movies is very visual and very gag based, as opposed to in this movie, it's all very verbal humor. It's funny lines.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The personalities are what are funny, as opposed to the things that somebody does. And I think that, and we've been kind of just defining that as like slapstick humor up to this point, but I think it goes beyond just slapstick. I think we need to look at like why visual humor really defines so many of these movies as opposed to dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's very sound. Billy the zombie gets the most slapstick action, but even he doesn't really get, like, he never gets like dunked in goo, or there are moments that this movie, if a Slimehouse auteur had taken the reins on it, it would be a very different movie.
Come, sisters. The candle's magic is almost spent. Dawn approaches.
How crazy is it that Bette Midler's name comes before the title of the movie? And nobody
does it really? I didn't actually notice that. Yeah.
The movie opens, it says Bette Midler, pans down to Hocus Pocus, and then says the rest of the cast.
Mm-hmm. Was this even like peak Bette Midler stardom? Like that
was like Beaches in the 80s.
I think it was like later Midler.
Was there a peak Bette Midler?
Yeah.
Yeah, was it like middle Midler?
Yeah.
Midler.
It was later Midler.
Yeah, are there any other just like random anecdotes people want to throw down that are worth before
Max had something about Disney World.
Oh yeah, I had the. I always had
the theme park present.
Yeah,
we should make that Max's theme park present.
Before I like really had seen this movie, because this movie, like, I saw it as a kid, but it wasn't anything seminal in my childhood, and I always had kind of a beef with it, because like my family's yearly vacation, or like bi-yearly vacation, was usually we go to Disney World for a couple of days around Halloween. And I loved the Disney Halloween party they would do that was like after hours where they'd have like all the Disney villains in like a parade and all this. Because I really liked like all the Disney villains, like Captain Hook and like all like the Evil Queen, all like the classic villains. And then whenever the whole Hocus Pocus renaissance started, which I want to say was like 2014, 2015.
Oh, that recently?
Yeah, like they started making...
late.
Yeah, they started making the Halloween parade, like all the Halloween of it was all Hocus Pocus stuff. Like the big fireworks show was hosted by the Sanderson sisters. Like
Really?
the live villain show was like the Sanderson sisters summoning like Jafar, and then like
Naturally.
yeah, and then like the parade would be like I Put a Spell on You was the music, and it was like I want to see the classic villains. I don't need to see these witches and everything. Like
But
so I
they
always
summoned
had
Jafar.
yeah, they summoned Jafar and they brought the villains, but the whole show would be very Sanderson sisters focused. And also I love Nightmare Before Christmas, and they used to have tons of like Jack Skellington, and then it was tons of like Winnie Sanderson everywhere. So it's like I was always like,
really?
yeah,
Wow,
I was like, I want to see these classics. I don't need to see all these witches. But watching this movie again, it's actually I like it a lot, and I think it's the most Halloween-y of all like the Disney movies. I mean, like it's like Scar is like not a Halloween character; he's a villain. But like, but yeah, like I totally get why they brought in all the witches and stuff. But yeah, like I had an aversion to this movie for that reason. It's remedied now.
Personal.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny because somebody had mentioned that they started with their release in the summer because they didn't want to compete with Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, now
And
it's
here they
taken
are,
over.
all
Yeah,
these years later.
93, big year for the Halloween movies.
Well, I have some pretty sad news that I gathered from the Hocus Pocus IMDb goofs section. A full moon on Halloween is a rare occurrence, and in fact, there was not a full moon in Halloween of 1992 or 1993.
There also weren't witches, Nelson.
Well, let me finish. The trivia said something along the lines of the last time a full moon happened on Halloween night was 1978, and the next time a full moon will happen on Halloween night is 2020.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Oh no! And there's not going to be anything going on.
Which is also, to make insult to injury, is also a Saturday.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Which
bummer.
Is a big bummer.
Yeah. I'm glad you saved that for the end of the show.
Yeah, that would have made the whole show not worth recording.
Yeah, that would have brought us all down.
Yeah, that would have really ruined it.
A good note to end on, Nelson. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thanks for coming in, Jake. Jake, where can we find or watch or listen to you on the internet?
Where can't you? If you wanna listen to a podcast about The Bachelor seasons that have already aired in the past, check out batchboys.net. And it's .net, not .com. We never wanted the .com. If you want to see me slip and slide, go check out the Schaefer Boys on YouTube. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my account is private and I will not accept you. But it is at Cakey Jake. And that's where I'm at.
Thank you for joining us, Jake. We hope to have you again on this because I know you're a Slimehouse. If I'm not mistaken, you were like a film studies minor with a Slimehouse emphasis or something like that.
Yeah, I actually double majored in slime and spice. So this
and
like really
shoop?
Yes. Which culminates in shoop.
And regardless of Halloween not being, or all that Halloween sadness that I threw in there, we're still going to make Halloween the best we can this holiday season. So yeah, tune in next week for another Halloween pumpkin slime.
All right, let's record this next one.